The original Amityville Horror, released on July 27, 1979, is a film about the struggles of a middle-class family in a changing country. The optimism of post-World War II America was vanishing as new pressures built up on all sides. 16 years earlier, the President of the United States had been murdered. Worse, most Americans did not believe the story about that killing that the government told them. This is starkly different from the trust Americans placed in voices like Dwight Eisenhower and Walter Cronkite. A new skepticism was rising. The Vietnam War shook every American family to the core. Even if they believed in the war's intent, it was difficult to absorb the daily news of dead soldiers, often no more than teenagers. Watergate flushed Richard Nixon out of the presidency only months after being reelected in a landslide, 49 out of 50 states. The Beatles were no longer a band. Terrorists attacked Olympic athletes. Kent State. The Cold War. 3 Mile Island. Gerald Ford was nearly assassinated by a former member of the Manson family. The oil crisis. And yes, economic recession, twice in the same decade, one beginning in 1973, and the second the same year as the Amityville Horror's release. With all this as backdrop, the simple story of a family moving into a haunted house came into focus in ways that earlier ghost movies hadn't. This wasn't Eleanor Lance's mental decay in 1963's The Haunting. If anything, it was the opposite. While Robert Wise's film feels distinctly personal, the Amityville Horror seems to be speaking for everyone. The American dream, a family, a better future for the kids than the adults enjoyed, and home ownership seem to be slipping away. That's the ghosts right there. The demon is inflation and unemployment and gas prices. It lets family buy a house that they seem, on the surface, to be able to afford, but they really can't. House foreclosures in the 1970s hit all-time high. Depending how you calculate them, that's even in comparison to the Great Depression. That they're ultimately driven out in the middle of the night with only the clothes on their backs is an obvious metaphor for eviction. Ghosts, a sheriff's note, it's all the same. The sequel, however, Amityville 2: The Possession, isn't at all that interested in money. The focus is now not on the reasons, but the collapse of the American family itself. The Montellis are not perfect before they even move into the house. As they arrive, the father, played by perfection by Burt Young, begins yapping at his kids. The oldest daughter even states that,
"That is such a creep."
and she's right. And she doesn't even get the worst of it, at least in that first scene. The oldest son, arriving late, receives the brunt of Dad's simmering, controlling temper. Where you could argue that the American dream corrupted the Lutz family, here we clearly see cracks in the armor before they even step through the door. It might not have ended in murder, but you get the impression that the Montelli family story was never going to have a happy ending, no matter the address. And that was largely the sentiment of most Americans at the time. Sure, the Reagan years brought some optimism later on, but this was 1982, America had yet to bounce out of recession, the Cold War had grown to a fever pitch, hell, America couldn't even laugh for a while after John Belushi died. Horror works best when we can relate to it. And yes, no one wants to be stabbed with a kitchen knife or have a limb amputated by a chainsaw, but those types of fears are easily surmounted by familiarity. We see a lot of those kind of things in movies, but they almost never manifest in any form in our everyday lives. So it's easy to compartmentalize those fears as just elements of the movies. But paying your bills, having a family member into drugs or alcohol abuse, yeah, those things tend to reverberate a whole lot stronger and harder. Movies coat them in layers of plot mechanics and metaphor, but they jump off the screen on a more subliminal basis, and we connect. Here's another way to illustrate it. Jaws. Sure, none of us want to be bitten by a shark, but it's a very, very rare event, and we know it. Millions still go to the beach and swim in the water. How, then, is the movie so effective? It's because of all the other anxieties in the movie. The sense of a community that has lost its way and now cares more about the profits from a summer tourist season than the safety of its citizenry. Local political corruption. Jaws, like the original Amityville horror, is in large part economic horror. Look how quickly the fishermen of the town get out of control over the prospect of the bounty on the shark. They think nothing of sacrificing their family's holiday roast. And make no mistake, the film is set on the 4th of July weekend for a damn reason. Anthony Montelli's abuse of his family, first the children, but then more explicitly his wife, is the real haunting. That horror ultimately gets passed down to his son and amplified, the same way alcoholism or a tendency to abuse drugs does in many families. That's the possession of the title. Am I saying that the house isn't haunted by ghosts? I'm saying that the narrative is serving two purposes, one on the surface and the other below. It's not a matter of an unreliable narrator. The storytellers are employing both at the same time. It's quite an accomplishment for a film that was initially dismissed as being a cheap, exploitative follow-up to a commercially successful real film. I apologize if you couldn't hear the scare quotes around real film in my voice. In a sequence clearly inspired by the first film, a priest, Father Adamski, is brought in to bless the house. This falls apart quickly when Anthony's behavior becomes unbearable for the priest and he leaves. In his car, he finds his copy of the Liturgy of the Hours torn to shreds. A certain amount of sacrilegious material is pretty standard for these types of movies after The Exorcist, but this one is surprising in a couple of ways. Instead of just having a possessed character spout off a bunch of insults towards God, here the film goes out of its way to showcase that the horror is not contained within the house. That shot of James Olsen standing at his car with the torn book in his hand, slowly turning toward the house's windows, who are we fooling? Its eyes, carries the film's most horrifying implication. Escaping the walls won't save you. The contagion is already out. The main reason many called out Amityville 2 for its exploitation tendencies is the incestuous sex in the film, and yeah, we'll get to that in a moment, but first, we need to take a moment to fully acknowledge that Anthony's aggression towards his wife is every bit as terrifying. He's domineering and demanding, no concern ever for Dolores' feelings. No, strike that. Is easy to see that part of why he's doing it is that he wants her to feel harshly demeaned, feel less important. This is an all-too-real situation for way too many women. Really, anyone who has ever lived in a situation like that would most definitely prefer a simple poltergeist infestation. And then there's Sonny's seduction of Patricia, the teenage daughter. This follows the film's most bravado sequence, in which Sonny follows disembodied sounds and voices to the basement and succumbs to demonic possession. His bedroom is in the attic, and as the scene begins, we see him staring out the house's right eye. The lights go out. He hears noises coming from downstairs, as if someone is thrashing around. He rushes to the hall and calls out, but no one responds. Before descending, he reaches into a construction worker's bag and brandishes a hammer to defend himself. He's not some body count slasher victim. He's not investigating in the dark in his underwear. Instead, although the audience is still sympathetic to him, visually he's allowed to take the image of a villain instead, appearing throughout the sequence as a tall silhouette gripping a weapon. He descends even further into the basement to retrieve one of his father's rifles. He replaces the hammer, a purely defensive tool normally used to fix problems, with the ambiguous firearm. Rifles can certainly be used for self-defense, though I'd argue that a handgun or shotgun are far more appropriate, but they can also be used as offensive weapons. In an earlier scene, maybe 10 minutes ago, Sonny used a shotgun to pry his father away from assaulting his mother. The film has subtly shifted Sonny from pure victim of his father's abuse to a kid willing to defend himself and his loved ones, to something far darker. Perhaps now reassured with the rifle in his hands, Sonny manages to go even deeper. He finds a tunnel that presumably leads from the basement to the boathouse. There he is disturbed to find a living human arm extending out of the house's foundation. It's quickly dismissed as a hallucination or perhaps the demon messing with Sonny's mind, but that quick moment visually clarifies to the audience that the real threat here is entirely human and merely using the haunted house as a sheepskin disguise. The rest of the sequence plays as a cross between the park stroll in Jacques Tourneur's Cat People and the final action shenanigans of Sam Raimi's Evil Dead, with an unseen force seeming to stalk Sonny. The lighting, shadows, and camera movements become broader and broader as it progresses. Lalo Schifrin's gothic score stretches impossible tension across the scene. He climbs back up the staircase back to his bedroom. He has now traveled the entire house only to end up back where he started, except for one detail. After slamming his bedroom door closed, he stands in front of the left side window. He started out in front of the right eye, but the demon finally attacks him in front of the left. Pop culture has simplified this, but Western esotericism defines occultist behaviors as left-hand path, or the road less traveled, as opposed to right-hand path, which is typified by groupthink or organized religions. In this movie's simple terms, over the course of his journey through the house, Sonny falls into his father's worst impulses. He's thrown back onto his bed by an unseen force. The camera pulses forward and back from on top of him, tearing open his shirt to reveal his chest. He screams and cries. It's clear what's visually being represented here, right? Notice how childlike and innocent Sonny appears during the assault. Clearly this is a recreation of an event he's all too familiar with. And it should be equally obvious who's really victimized him in the past. Following the assault, Sonny rises from his bed changed. In the real world, child abuse is often cyclical, passed down from parent to child. Sonny stares at himself in the mirror. His hair is wet and straggly, now a close match to Boris Karloff's Frankenstein. His face is changed. He looks like a monster, because now his father's evil has passed down to him, and he knows it, so he screams. The house screams too, with slamming windows and doors, shaking furniture, and probably least subtly, guns firing. Whatever innocence Sonny managed to hold on to this long is now gone. After such intensity, the film cuts to Sonny in Patricia's room. Honestly, we haven't seen all that much of these two characters' relationship up to now. But as this scene begins, they have immediate chemistry and it seems lived in. Perhaps they've grown close as a survival instinct in such a fucked up family? At any rate, she tells him that she thinks their father tries to force himself on their mother sexually. It's a stark admission, but delivered with a business-as-usual deadpan tone. You'd think it'd be emotional, but it's not. The abuse is not a new issue. He flirts with her, crossing socially acceptable lines almost immediately, and she responds, maybe a bit more shyly, but not much. When he asks to take photographs of her because she's the most beautiful girl in the world, she goes along with it without hesitation. Even when he asks her to strip off her nightshirt, she pauses only long enough to heighten his arousal. These are adolescents dealing with normal coming-of-age stuff, except that they're doing it in hell. And this moment is the ultimate moment in the film, at least dramatically. Patricia's seduction isn't top-down. Any abuse coming from her father carried with it all the threats associated with authority figures, but from her brother, who she dotes on and cares for, that he would lead her astray is far more disturbing. True evil doesn't conquer bodies, it conquers minds. When the innocent begin to corrupt each other and themselves, the moral decay is complete, and we, as an audience, are totally complicit. The scene of Diane Franklin's Patricia taking off her nightshirt stirs a ton of complicated emotions. We know what we're seeing is wrong on a number of levels, but it still carries erotic weight. And it really doesn't help that Diane Franklin may actually have been one of the most beautiful women in the world, as her brother claims. Suddenly, it should be crystal clear why the exploitative elements in this film are important. By including the audience in its seduction, the film is laying bare exactly how we've all become all too morally flexible. Think it doesn't apply to you? Check your browser history. Now, Amityville 2: The Possession does sort of waste all that impactful setup once Sonny's murder spree unfolds. The movie becomes a pretty generic Exorcist ripoff after that, with only brief bursts of interesting images. That said, outside William Peter Blatty's Exorcist III, which does not imitate the original in any way, it's probably the best Exorcist derivative ever made. Still, the interesting social contagion themes are all basically for naught. And that's too bad, really. The one attempt to bridge the first half with the second is the ending, which manages to evoke Father Karras' sacrifice at the end of The Exorcist, but go darker. Father Adamski survives the exorcism, but as we leave him in the house, we see the physical effects of demonic possession overtaking him. He calls out for God not to forsake him, but if God answers, we certainly don't see it. I think that's because the problem here isn't spiritual at all. It's a human problem. Fear and paranoia in a world that seems to be falling apart has led these characters to their sad fates. All our worst impulses are on screen. Our collective anxieties over an entire society in decline is embodied in that house on 112 Ocean Avenue. Amityville 2: The Possession is not a perfect film, not by any means, but it's more ambitious than its predecessor and infinitely darker. It's mean because the subject matter is mean. It's ugly and gaudy in parts because our society often seems that way. In a world full of shallow conjuring movies, this one feels more profound than it probably deserves, but it's definitely the best of the Amityville films and actually one of the most respectable genre films of its era.